Hello everyone, welcome back to another one of these What I've Been Playing. I talk about the games I've been digging into recently, and I just finished Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, the latest entry in what over the past few years has quickly become my third favorite overall video game franchise. Absolutely love this game, and I do have to say before we dig into this, if you're familiar with these videos that I do, you know I tend to be rather vague and try and just talk about my overall impression and not spoil a whole lot, but in this case, this is not going to be spoiler-free at all. It's definitely for people who have already finished the game. Because in this particular instance, I really have to talk about a few things that are going to be absolute spoilers for important parts of the story to talk about what I really thought about this overall experience. So, in saying that, people watching past this point have played this game, hopefully, so I don't have to go over the story or any of that jazz, just talk more about my real impressions with this experience. And this is a franchise that I got into when it very first came out on the PS2, and then didn't get back into until just a couple of years ago with Zero, and then played through everything. And this, in many ways, felt like a culmination and celebration of 2 decades worth of storytelling, and I thought it was overall a brilliant experience and by far the most fun I've ever had with a game in this entire franchise. But it's not my overall favorite, it's one of my favorites. So really with this one of the things that I liked was I have always been a fan of RPGs, especially turn-based RPGs. My other favorite franchises are Final Fantasy and anything Xeno, Gears, Saga, Blade. And I've always been a big fan of that. So having the combination, starting with 7, and then into this, of that more traditional JRPG feeling style with the Yakuza style, that melding, I think, worked even better in Infinite Wealth than it did in 7, in Yakuza Like a Dragon. I thought part of that was the incorporation of Kiryu adding a different perspective and balanced Ichiban, and I really liked that, and I liked how it flowed from being more Ichiban's style and perspective to when, in the middle of the game, the crew splits, and you have more of Kiryu's perspective, and I like the balance of tone and how they played off each other in this. It's also refreshing to have a turn-based JRPG with an adult cast, not teens, in a non-fantasy setting, and that combination is fairly rare. And it felt like a perfect fusion of everything that I like about Yakuza with everything that I love about Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. It seems like this love letter to the history of this particular franchise, as well as the legacy of JRPGs before it. And it's one of the best examples that I've played in a long time of why I really love video games, just in the general sense. Like, that was the number one thing that I took from this one, was that it was one of the most joyful gaming experiences ever. Even when the story dug into some more sorrowful moments, it still kept that infinite wealth of life, and exploring those elements, and just kept the experience being just upbeat and fun. And even when you had those sad moments that almost bring you to tears, it was still in an enjoyable fashion. And story-wise, I think it was good. Not my overall favorite in the franchise, but I think the strengths that it had were that balance between the very different style of storytelling with Ichiban, and then my favorite parts were actually with Kiryu, having played all the previous games and really growing to love that character and experience his journey. I loved the Reminiscence Tour type stuff, 100%ed that, and just loved going into it and going back, and especially going back into Kamurocho. It really felt like this nostalgic celebration of the legacy of this iconic character and the history of the whole franchise, and that's really what helped give so much gravitas, I think, to the overall experience. Because the main, outside of that, like if you were just had Ichiban and Kiryu's element wasn't really engaged, like say he had not been a larger part of this experience, I feel like the overarching plot of the benevolent Hawaiian religion turned cult interacting with the second wave of dismantling the Yakuza and what they were and digging into the nuclear waste dumping element of the plot, all that together was fascinating and fun to explore. And I love the way it tied in directly with all the Bleach Japan and things within Like a Dragon. I thought it did a great job tying into a lot of the history of the franchise, especially with 7, but even more beyond that. But I felt like, as much as that was enjoyable, it wouldn't even be in my top 5 in the franchise overall stories. Just looking at that aspect, not looking at Hawaii itself or the gameplay, anything, just from a story perspective, it was just good, not fantastic. And what elevated it for me, one, is within that just decent story, there were some amazingly well written relationships within the cast of familiar characters and new characters, to where you cared about those relationships so strongly that it helped elevate the quality of the just, decent overall story. And then the addition of Kiryu's element and his journey along with Ichiban, and Ichiban kind of rising to the role that he began in his journey in Like a Dragon in 7, juxtaposed with Kiryu, the twilight of his story. Having those two together was, for me, the genius of the storytelling, because that really strengthened the whole thing and gave it some variety. And some of my favorite storytelling beats were the two very different personalities and perspectives of our two main leads, and how they played off each other and really helped each other in a moment of need in very different ways, and they played their roles perfectly. And I just loved how that worked out. And splitting up the groups again, I think one of the best elements was making learning about your teammates something that was not only beneficial to experiencing the relationships and the story and the world building, but actually affecting the gameplay, was a brilliant move that made it seem really worthwhile digging into these characters, because you were given a payoff for taking the time to run around the city and find those pink hearts, to have those storytelling moments and fill out your bingo card and learn about these characters, and then go to the bar and have your drink link moments where you sit and talk and build those individual stories, to where I actually think, on the whole, the one thing that this game does better than any other game in the series is make you truly understand, appreciate, and feel like you know every single member of the cast beyond the crux of the main plot, all within the context of side story stuff. I feel more familiar with the way these people think and feel than in almost any other game, especially with such a large cast. I think that was done brilliantly. The other thing that was far and beyond any other game in the franchise for me was just the fun factor. As I said before, Hawaii was just the overall most fun setting that they've ever done. There's so much in there. The crazy delivery was that was one of my favorite crazy taxi style games I've ever played, even going up against the original, like on the Dreamcast. It's up there with that. It was so much fun, just as a fun little aside, and there's so much to do, so much variety, and everything was just silly and joyful and wonderful. And Dondoko Island blew my mind. It's not going to be something that everyone's going to enjoy, and normally I'm not into the kind of Animal Crossing type game, but this is the first time where I ever understood why people like that kind of stuff, because I loved it. I put at least 15 hours in Dondoko Island, and there's more I could have done. I've wrapped up the whole story and got it up to the 5-star resort and did all that. But you could have kept going and going, and I couldn't believe how much there was to do. That Dondoko Island, 15 hours and there's still stuff left to do. That's longer than most non-JRPGs I've ever played. That was so big that a slightly longer, slightly more like enhanced version of that Don Doko Island minigame. It could have been its own game. My wife was watching me play a bit of it, and she's like, I would have bought that just separately and just played that. It was so incredibly well done. I couldn't believe how much there was to craft and how big the island was. And then when we got to the farm, it was so much more than I thought it was. I thought you were just going to send some people to work on a farm and just a little cutscene. No, it's like a whole nother little island, and there's more activities to do and so much going on. And I got addicted to really perfecting the layout, of my resort. Like, this is the street for this kind of stuff, and that just building the buildings and then crafting new stuff and replacing them. And there's so much to do. I could have kept going well beyond that point. And you really felt like you were in this vast cityscape that didn't feel big just to feel big. It felt like every single area and district had this authentic and distinct feel to where there was a great amount of variety and there's so much fun to have. I put, I think, about 70 hours into this, and there's still a ton more to do, and it's just a massive experience, but it didn't feel bloated. The longest one, as far as how much time I put in before this, would have been 5, and 5 was incredible for its variety and the huge numbers of cities, but it felt a little bloated overall. It felt like there was almost too much, or more than it needed, and here it never felt that way. It didn't feel like I put almost 70 hours into this game. It was so addictive and just fun from the gameplay perspective. I feel like they, not just all the exploration was wonderful and the variety of minigames was wonderful, but the actual meat and potatoes of this thing, the turn-based fighting system, felt like an improved version of what they accomplished in Like a Dragon. It really felt like this is the first time that, since that transition where, as a turn-based RPG, I think this felt like an equal to the legacy franchises, to your Dragon Quest and your Final Fantasy and your Shin Megami Tensei. It really felt like that to me, and I was just enjoying every moment of it. From just the goons on the street to the crazy boss fights. And I love that giant squid near the end. It just felt like this crazy boss fight and things getting pulled in and having to fight your way out, and the giant shark. And there's so many great elements, and had the usual genius Yakuza style to the cinematography of its cutscenes, especially leading into like a big boss fight. Just fantastic, and just I really have zero complaints. This is one of the few games that I've ever played in my near 40 years on this earth that I would say is a 10 out of 10 for me. There's nothing that I disliked about it. Everything was great. It's the most fun I've ever had with a game in this franchise. Again, story-wise, I don't have complaints about any element of it, really. It just wasn't my absolute favorite as far as the real emotional weight, and I feel like a lot of that was, for me, more on the Kiryu side, just because of the history and attachment I have to that character. And the ending was the one thing that really took me by surprise. And my wife was like, "No, they're not gonna kill him. They're not gonna kill him." But for me, the weight of the emotional pull for being so attached to this character, Kiryu is like one of my all-time favorite video game protagonists, and someone I've really connected with over the past few years as a character and his journey, and feeling him go through this reminiscence and feeling his life come to this closure, and him seeking that closure, and the weight of his cancer, of his illness, and put me in this place thinking about appreciating the time you have left and reminiscing over elements of my own life, and really emotionally prepared me for him to die. And as I said earlier in this video, obviously, at this point, I hope you have you didn't get this far into the video and haven't played through the game to the end. You should have, because I'm going to talk about the ending right now. He doesn't die, and I was surprised. My wife was like, "They're not going to kill him, not going to kill him." And it felt like, it almost felt like they should have let him die, because he found so much closure. There are a few things I feel like when he didn't see everyone from the orphanage, that maybe they weren't going to let him die because they can't kill him without having that moment of closure, because they had so much, all those sections with Date and getting into all these people from his past, and that was like building up to this big emotional finale that would have blown away the ending of Man Who Erased His Name, which that already had me crying. It was building up to that, and that's the one thing that was, I almost want to say, felt missing, that wasn't the big end to his story, his era, but at the same time, I can't call it a complaint because who knows what they're planning for the future of that. It's one thing that should be interesting, but it almost felt like it was a weird mixed feeling where there was some emotional payoff to the journey that he went through, and him learning to trust others, and him exploring those elements of his life and finding forgiveness for certain things. And it really felt like a build up to that in that sense, but it was missing that one like big emotional payoff with him having that real moment with at least Haruka and Haruto, and having that moment that was missing. But I don't feel that it was unintentionally missing. I feel like there's a plan for that in relation to what's coming in the future. And one thing that I think could be interesting, just speculating as far as the age of characters, we'll definitely get a 9 with Ichiban as a focus, and probably Kiryu not involved really. And then age-wise, say that's 2-3 years from now, and then another 2-3 years from then Haruto would be a teenager. And I think it would be fascinating to have one where he's a teenager, he maybe gets himself into trouble, or goes a little bit off the rails, or something, maybe he's at odds with Ichiban, just like something where he's in trouble, or on the wrong path, and then Grandpa Kiryu shows up, and it's this big reveal, surprising thing to help guide his life, and then eventually he becomes, after the Ichiban era comes to a close, and then we get his era of games, like say the series keeps continuing. I think that will be a really cool path to take. Another thing that I've been speculating is that I know there's issues with the lead actor for the Judgment games, but overall I feel like somehow in some capacity we are going to get a third Judgment game, and I would bet money it's taking place in Hawaii, because there's no way they built and spent so much time on that amazing city and put so much into it to never use it again. I really think that might be one of the next things that we see. So it's interesting to speculate on the future of the franchise, and just goes really to show like how much of a lasting emotional effect and just pure fun appeal Infinite Wealth had for me, that I just want more. I want to keep going. I'm so excited by what I played in this game that I just want more. And I could go back and just explore and do other stuff, and maybe finish a few little side quests I didn't quite wrap up and things like that. There's so much to do in here that for me it's one of the best games in the franchise. It's probably my overall third favorite in the entire series. And the one thing that really knocks it out of the park and makes it in its own right better than every other game in the franchise is the expansiveness, is the fun factor, is just the pure joy of everything. The job system was improved, and everything about that element was, everything that was good about 7 was made even better in here. It just felt like story-wise it was just good, but not the overall greatest in the franchise. So an absolute blast. I know I've talked about this one forever. This is one that I could keep going and get into more nitty-gritty detail about the individual parts of the story, but yeah, just leave it at that for one of these what I've been playing lately. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, incredible. Honestly, it's one of my favorite games I've played just in general.